Good evening. Welcome to Better Together, sharing our lupus stories. My name is Chanel Gabriel, and we are all the way live and talking about lupus. So it's season 3, and some of you might not know who we are listening to. So we're going to go a little bit and give you a little background on our amazing show. So Better Together is a bi-weekly live series that we bring together lupus warriors as well as medical and guest experts who discuss real challenges, suggestions, solutions, and we just want to help others on their journey with living with lupus. And we want to empower you, okay, so you can live your best life. So every other Tuesday, we are going to be here 6:30 p.m. So now join me as I greet my co-host, the amazing, the brilliant Dr. Michaela Bayard, also known as the Lupus Doc. Hey, Lupus Doc.
Hey, Chanel. Thank you for having me again. I'm so excited for us to kick this off together. And we're now in season 3, which is amazing. We started this in 2022, and I knew this was going to be really important for us and exciting. But this show has really shown me how dear this work is to me. And I'm just happy that we're still here. We're still connecting with people living with lupus.
Yep, same here. I mean, the past 2 seasons, we talked about so many different things. I mean, everything from dating to health equity and equality. And we're here still sharing our lupus stories. So everyone out there, please feel free to check out links to past episodes at bettertogetherlupus.com. You can check it out and see what you've missed. But you have so much more to gain as we kick off season 3. And what better way to start than to talk about self-advocacy? We've talked a little bit about it before, but we're going to bring it a little bit more personal into life.
It's true, Chanel. This is a great way to start off the season. Self-advocacy means everything. It tells your doctors, your hospitals, your communities, your politicians what's important. So it's really bringing up those issues that are important and people on the other side may not know. So I just think that we have some great guests who are going to really show us what that means, who've created their own path to ensuring that they have the support and the help they need to thrive with their lupus. So tonight is really talking about advocating for your health, not just in the doctor's office, but in your community.
And the world, and even the world, because that's so important as well. So yeah, we have some great guests. First, we're going to speak to our friend Tamika Smith, lupus advocate and entrepreneur based in New Orleans. She is passionate about advocating for healthcare equity, and she's no stranger to this show, but we wanted to have her here. But she's also no stranger to another popular show. Earlier this year, she was on with the one and only Tamron Hall, where she shared her personal experiences of being what she called a medical gaslighting survivor. And we're going to talk a little about that and how she fought for the care she needed. We also have Tamika. Tamika created her brand, Monet's Healthy Eats, which promotes healthy alternatives. And her Luby fun fact, just a little something about her. She is a personal assistant for a celebrity couple. Ooh, I can't wait to talk to her about the ways we can advocate.
And last but not least, we have a colleague, Dr. Thais Gaines. She's a physician executive and emergency medicine physician, and as a healthcare leader, journalist, PR professional, she has served as the health editor for thegrio.com. She's spoken on national outlets about many healthcare and equity issues, and she sits on a number of health advisory boards. So Chanel, she's doing it all, and she also somehow finds time to run a few half marathons. And I heard that might have been something you did as well.
Oh, yeah, girl, that was back in the day. But no, it's a lot. It's so cool that I can't wait to speak to her. Actually, I have one more guest. Not our final guest is actually Monet Stewart Chochun. She is a Lupus Foundation of America ambassador and a support group facilitator. She hails from Nashville, Tennessee, but she is representing LA. And she's going to share her story about how she became a advocate, as well as an advocate for other Lupis, both in her community and on Capitol Hill. Yeah, she was in DC. So I'm so excited to hear from her.
It's awesome. And we do want to hear from you, our audience. This is a live show, so send us your comments, your questions in the chat. Join our live conversation.
Perfect. Yes. So everyone in the chat, feel free to make some noise and join me as we welcome and meet our first guest, Tamika Smith.
Hi.
Hi, girl. We are so happy to have you here with us again to get on Better Together. So first thing, shout out to you, Madam Celebrity Couple Personal Assistant. And you told me you directed one of their photo shoots, and some of the photos were published in Swag Her magazine.
That is
So
correct. Yes.
yeah, that's such a great experience.
Thank you. It is.
So congratulations for such a cool experience, Tamika. We want to hear everything. Take us back. Tell us about your personal lupus journey.
My lupus journey started in 2020, May of 2020, during COVID at that. And I started experiencing joint pain. Now, it's not that I didn't have joint pain before, but this joint pain became a little bit more intense. I would have joint pain and muscle pain. Originally, I was diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome. So I just took that diagnosis and just shuffled along with my life because the flares that I was into were not totally consistent. And at the time, I didn't know anything about having a lupus flare, and I didn't know that I had lupus. So carrying along the joint pain and the headaches were excruciating. They were debilitating. I was nauseous. I was dizzy. I was tired all the time, chronically fatigued, working out. And I'm like, something is just not right. So I saw my rheumatologist and my panels came back as negative. I didn't have lupus at the time. It didn't show on my panels. So I was being seen by a neurologist for the headaches. And then I started seeing a slew of other specialty doctors. But I do believe because of the microaggressions and the micro infidelities that I experienced along the way, it just pushed back my process of getting the diagnosis that I needed because the labs continuously to be as normal. So I was walking around with this chronic pain, not being able to function, put on certain medications, and I just felt like it wasn't doing anything. It wasn't getting to the heart of the problem. So we tested again in October of 2020, and that's when the test came back as positive. But it was not an easy journey at all.
Mhm.
I mean, I really admire, Tamika, that you kept going back because you were listening to yourself, that something didn't feel right. What was that about? Like, how did you decide something, really doesn't feel right? I'm going to keep going back.
I had already experienced chronic pain illness prior to in 2019. And I knew then that something wasn't right in my body. And I started to think, I'm like, I'm doing everything right. I am in the top percentile, as I was told, as an African American young female that was doing the things that I needed to do for my health. I didn't have any health issues. My labs were fine. Even my vitamin levels, they were even fine. So I was doing really, really well for myself. And I said, but in my gut, I knew in my heart that something was not right because I was not performing at my career anymore. Like I was not, it's like I was there, but I wasn't there.
Right.
I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't getting enough sleep at night. And when I would get up and sleep for, the amount of hours that I needed to sleep, I never felt rested. But my performance overall, just my work performance plummeted.
No, and I mean, I think that that's one of the things that makes it really hard with lupus is because it's so much of it self-reported. So much of it is I don't feel well, or I'm tired, or I feel achy at this particular time of day. That makes it really challenging and means that people are having to really listen to you and trust you when you say something's wrong. And so you also suffer from endometriosis, and you talk about that path to diagnosis very, very often, and as well as about living with lupus. But you call yourself a survivor of medical gaslighting. What does that mean? That is like a mic drop. That's a bar right there. What does that mean?
Whenever you are not being heard, or you don't feel seen, or you feel that your symptoms are being downplayed, and within your heart of hearts, something is not right with me. Something is not right with my body. I don't feel normal. I don't feel like I'm getting enough rest. And constantly going back to the doctor, even when you're told, bring in your symptoms, bring in a list of your symptoms, bring in pictures of you when you're having these flares, bring in videos. I did all of that. I did everything that I was asked to do, and I still was being invalidated multiple times. But I fought, and I was persistent. I fought. I have to add that I fought, and I was persistent to get to the bottom of things.
No, and that's important.
You know, to me, when you talk about that fight piece, you know, tell us what that looks like. What does that mean, you know, fighting when you're coming to the office saying, hey, something doesn't feel right?
Are you flipping tables over? Are you?
I wanted to, but I did not. You know, it's having to hold your ground. It's having to hold your ground. And that's one of the hardest things that you can do, because there have been many times on my journey that I just wanted to lash out and lose composure. But I knew that I had to keep it all together in order to advocate for myself and being heard. I couldn't have a tantrum at that moment. But it was a process that I had to go through that really affected me mentally. And there were times I felt voiceless in the system, but I continued to speak out and I continued to express myself. And I didn't mind switching doctors. That was another thing. I didn't mind switching doctors and just saying like, hey, this is what's going on with me at the moment. I'm not sure, but I do need answers. But I had my moments of wanting to give up. I had my moments of wanting to lose hope. I had my moments of saying enough is enough. Whatever's wrong with me, it just is what it is. But I knew I couldn't go down like that.
And I think that goes into the microaggression as a Black woman too. Like you can't, I think that's so interesting. You said, I can't lose my temper, you know, because that's also a part of the dynamic too. You don't want to be the angry Black woman that's just being difficult. So how do you navigate that? And yeah, that advocacy for yourself is so important. So, I mean, did you always have this courage? You just was like, I'm just going to fight. I'm, you know, come hell or high water, as my mom would say. Or did it just get to a point, or did you what helped you get that courage to advocate that way?
My support system. I would say my support system, me having my son, you know, not wanting him to see me go through these things. And I felt like I needed to fight for him, because if I had stopped at that moment, I probably wouldn't be here today to be able to speak. And even for those people, those moments I felt like giving up, I was reading stories and hearing things about people who didn't make it this far, who lost their lives. And if it had not been possibly for them being invalidated, they could have gotten a diagnosis sooner and something could have happened. Some interventions could have been put into place. So that was my fight. My fight consisted of having my support from my family, seeing my son every day, and the people who didn't make it this far.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And I guess maybe for somebody that might be a little more timid, like what advice do you have for patients who feel like their concerns aren't being heard?
The advice that I have is that bring a family member, bring a friend, bring someone that you can confide in, someone that you trust, someone that is into your health and your well-being. Because there are times that we have those moments that we're feeling so unwell that we're not able to advocate for ourselves. And that's what I had to do a lot of times. I had to bring someone along in the journey with me, educate them, create a binder of the symptoms that you're going through, your medications, any medical records that you may have received from the medical records department itself. And hang in there, even if you have to wear apparel that says anything about medical gaslighting, or I don't feel well today, or I want to be heard today. Invest in that apparel, because it's important if you are that person that just, you know, shy about speaking out, or you don't know how to properly speak out.
I can say that works. When you bring someone else into the doctor's office as a physician, I also want to show them and explain to them. So it's also an opportunity for you to kind of hear again the plan, what we're doing together, how we're partnering. So I really like that idea.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a champion for lupus patients everywhere, you know, so that they know their voices matter. Because sometimes it is really hard to think that you're alone, and you might not know anyone else with lupus, so you also feel kind of alone. But hearing from others that they've gone through this, it's super helpful. So with that, I'd like to bring in our next guest to join us and talk a little bit about it from a doctor's perspective. So I'm going to welcome board certified ER physician and medical executive, the super accomplished, super busy, Dr. Thais Gaines. Dr. Ty.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your very busy schedule and weather. I know you do a bit of everything, Dr. Ty. You're an emergency physician, public relations, media consulting, and I heard now you're in law school. So just wow. Congrats on everything you're doing and will accomplish.
Thank you.
So earlier we have heard about what Tamika faced, and we kind of want to hear your perspective on this idea of medical gaslighting and what might be going on in a doctor's mind when their patient is really expressing their feeling that they're unheard.
Absolutely. So yes, I could hear your story that you were sharing, Tamika, and thank you for being willing to tell the story, because I consider myself a compassionate physician, but I think the more that we hear what it's like on the other side of these visits, I think that will continue to make all of us better physicians. In addition to that, I think so there's a difference between a physician, I think, telling a patient, you don't have this particular disease or your particular testing is negative, and dismissing your concern, if that makes sense, right? So if someone comes in and says, this is hurting me, we check the test that we know that we can check, or maybe like your labs at first were negative, that's to come to you and say, you know what, right now your tests don't show you have lupus, or it doesn't show you have this disease, isn't quite the same thing as dismissing you. And I think that's a point to be made, in the sense of, I think that physicians need to do better, or could do better, at not just saying, okay, everything's negative, you're great, nothing's wrong today. Like when I teach residents and they'll go in and say, oh, everything's fine, nothing's wrong. It's like, but the patient still has pain. So I actually teach them, don't say nothing's wrong, because something's wrong. Even if it's gas, right? There's something wrong because the patient feels something. Just tell them, these are the things that we checked for and took off the table, and then just advise them what to do next if they don't feel better. And so I say that to say that sometimes it's true that the disease that a person comes and says, I think I have this. Sometimes it's true that they don't have it. I think the nuance is, how do we communicate that? And then how does the patient not then become frustrated, so that they then do the follow-up that's necessary to diagnose some of these complicated diseases like lupus, that's hard to diagnose, and even endometriosis, which can be very hard to diagnose, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, Dr. Ty. And for our audience, what are some ways that you think it would be helpful for the patient to kind of communicate in that setting?
Absolutely. I like Tamika's tips about keeping your records, keeping a log, writing things down. I think being meticulous about what's happening with you and keeping those records as much as possible and bringing that with you definitely is helpful. I think the biggest thing to remember is that medicine is not a perfect science. I think sometimes from the patient standpoint, there can be a perception that, like, if I have disease A, there's test A and it's positive or it's negative, and you should be able to figure this out. And if you can't figure it out, it means you're a bad doctor, right? But that is true for some diseases, but for many other disease processes, it's just not that simple. And so we need to work as a team. And so I'm not saying that it's anyone's fault. It's just some of these diseases are difficult to figure out. I think my suggestion to patients would be not to give up. Like you said, Tamika, you were persistent in going back. I see a lot of patients that, especially from the ER standpoint, come to the ER with X pain. Mind you, let me just stop. The ER is not the place to try to diagnose a chronic illness, okay? We are there for life-threatening situations that you talk about what is in a doctor's mind. We are thinking what is going to be life-threatening and not let you go home tonight, or you're gonna go home and not make it to tomorrow. So heart attack, stroke, things, exploding in the belly or things being infected, and so on and so forth, right? That's where our mind is tuned to in the ER setting, for one. So if you did come in, Tanika, and you said, I have this wrist pain or I have this leg pain, my first thing is her joint infected? Is there something broken? Did she injure herself? And once that's ruled out, in my mind, I've done my job. And the next step is to go back to your primary. And sometimes in that setting, people will say, well, they didn't actually tell me what's wrong. And maybe they don't always understand that like the ER is not always the place for that. So I think what I would say is always follow up. If someone tells you to follow up somewhere, a physician, do that. Even if you feel like, well, I already went there or I already saw them, make sure you're following up, especially if you're not getting better. And think about it as we're solving this together, right? It's not that one test, one conversation, one visit is going to do it. Think about it as we are going to figure this out together and bring everything that you can bring to do that. And don't be discouraged if the first couple of visits doesn't get you there.
No, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. And that ER is a very a place filled with a lot of trauma, not just trauma patients. Like, there's a lot that happens. A lot of times that's where we go when we aren't feeling well in the middle of the night and can't see someone.
Absolutely.
So, but that idea of, a miscommunication or maybe feeling like you're not heard can happen in the ER. And while I understand, of course, these are for life-threatening things at 2 a.m., this is the only place I can go. So
Agreed.
What advice do you have for patients that might have this is a case where a doctor is like not trying to listen, for whatever reason, and they're not in an ER setting? Do I go to an attending? Like, I don't know what that looks like, but if there's a particular doctor that I'm having trouble communicating with, what should I do? Do I file a complaint? What's available to me?
That's a great question. So it depends on what setting you're in. If you're in an ER and it's the middle of the night, that probably is the only doctor that's there seeing patients. There's probably not a whole lot of other folks to talk to, but you can talk to your nurse. You can ask to speak to the patient advocacy team. A lot of hospitals will have those. Sometimes you may not get to talk to them until the morning, but you can absolutely talk to the director of that department. If you're in an office setting, you can talk to the office manager and see what it is that they can do. Is there another clinician that you can see? But I think the other thing to kind of just back up and think about too is, again, and then nothing that I'm saying is defending docs. I'm just trying to, explain the perspective, is that it is still, yes, there's science, but a big part of medicine is the interpersonal relationship. So the same way at your job, with your friends, with your cousins, you get along with some people, you don't get along with others. Some people annoy you. Some people trigger things in you where you're like, I don't even know why I don't like this coworker, right? They remind me of someone. Just remember, your doctors are people also, right? And so I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just simply saying, remember that if you feel like you're having a communication barrier, use those same skills that you use in your marriage, at work with your employees, at work with your boss, right? I think sometimes we and I'm a patient also. Sometimes we just expect things to just work and be seamless in a medical environment, but they're humans. The same way you have to deal with difficult humans, or even if they're not difficult, you guys just can't seem to get on the same wavelength. I think that use those same skills and make sure that you're being heard. So maybe you have to explain it a different way. Maybe you have to say, hey, before you run out of the room, can I try to explain that differently? I don't think you heard me. There's nothing wrong with doing that, because underneath all of this other stuff and all these degrees, there's still a human that's going to have their own biases, and they don't have to be racial and gender, and they don't have to be negative biases, right? Some of the biases that we experience are when you, like, for example, aging physicians, when they see another, senior patient, there was something I read that said, like, they're more apt to not think they're sick because they're almost seeing themselves in that patient, right? So they're doing less workup instead of more, not because they think unfavorably, actually because they think favorably, right? So just remember, there's all these other things going on. Make sure if you don't get it out the right way, if you don't feel satisfied, don't just let the doc leave the room. Don't just take your papers and go. Just say, is there anyone that could re-explain that to me, or explain that to me again, so that in a way that I can understand it. Don't just take them and go because you're frustrated, or maybe it triggered you from another visit that wasn't such a positive visit. That's you. That may not be that particular experience. So make sure you deal with whatever that is and come back and say, you know what, I really didn't understand you. Is there somebody else that can explain? And if that doctor's busy or ran into another room, maybe the nurse can explain it. Maybe the physician assistant can look at it and explain it. But there's nothing wrong with asking more questions. That is your right to, at the end of the day, understand as much as possible. It doesn't have to be antagonistic, but do stand up for yourself. Absolutely. Because if you don't understand what I say to you, you're not going to get better. We both lose at that point.
Right. No, thank you. I mean, and that's so helpful to think about that, because I do think sometimes I do expect the perfect experience from any medical professional, and I don't ever think about the humanity in it, and the fact that we do have we understand the communication barriers that happen with people. I think that, thank you for allowing us to at least also humanize the doctors in the moment and really understand maybe we also have to work on our communication, or maybe finding a mediator the same way I would at work if I'm having a challenge with a superior. Maybe the nurse can be that mediator, finding that. I think that's really, really helpful information. And we have to keep, like you said, we have to go the extra mile to advocate for ourselves, even when it seems challenging. So it's our lupus, and yes, our voice has to be included in the conversation about our health. That's it.
Yes. And sometimes we don't realize, sometimes we're running and trust me, on our end, we're tracked how long it takes us to see patients, how many patients we see in a day. It totally may not be personal. So sometimes if a patient goes, hold on, I talk really fast sometimes. You went too fast. I don't know what you said. It also slows me down too, to go, maybe I didn't do that right. And so I appreciate it when a patient says that to me. I understand that there may not be people that enjoy that level of communication on both sides, both docs and patients. And they're not, they don't necessarily want to be corrected or asked to repeat themselves. But this is the job that we're in, and I think that the docs that really care will be open to saying, thank you for stopping me and letting me know you didn't catch that. I'm happy to explain it. Or I don't have time because this patient is critical, but I'm going to send someone in to talk to you. I think that's fair on both sides.
That's so true, Ty. I really appreciate your perspective. I think it's good to hear, the ways we can work on things, how patients can work on things, and that there's work to be done on both ends. And the heart of it is communication and improvement in that. So now our next guest has taken self-advocacy another step to include advocating for lupus patients everywhere. She is a lupus support group facilitator who has traveled from LA to DC, and she's doing some very important work. So we would like to welcome Miss Monet Stewart Cho-Chun.
Hello.
Hello, Miss Monet. So I love how all the Luppies got the purple on today.
I have a dot. I have one purple dot on this shirt.
You know what? I was not a purple person until I was diagnosed with lupus. Yeah, red was my color. But yeah, I was diagnosed 3 years ago with lupus. I had no idea what it was. It does not run in my family at all. So I really had to dive deep into researching and seeing what it was about. So my mom suggested that I start going to support groups. And when I would go to the support groups, when they would call on me, I would just log out.
Hold on. Before we get to support groups, you gotta tell me your lupus story. What was the path to diagnosis? We want to get the chronological part.
Yes, get to it first. Yeah, I had a lot of fatigue. There was a lot of swelling, and I didn't know what it was. So my husband and I always go somewhere for our anniversary every year. And we were in a totally different country. And my fingers, one hand looks like both hands. And we were like, what's going on? I'm like, I do not want to be hospitalized in another country. So I'm like, we need to figure out what's going on. So that was in 2014. So they start running tests to see what was going on. A lot of blood work, a lot of tests. And it wasn't until September 2021 that I was actually diagnosed. So yeah, it took maybe 6-7 years until they came up with a diagnosis because they couldn't figure out what it was. And so after that, I was like, okay, this is my life. This is the journey. I'm like, let's get to work. and, so, and so that's when I started doing all the support groups. And then I would, I didn't want to talk because I felt like I was mourning my old self.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to accept it. And my mom, she used to go with me to the support groups and she said, you're going to eventually have to start talking because this is your community now.
Right.
And so eventually I started talking. Now I'm a chatty Cathy. And so, yeah, so, the neurologist came, the cardiologist, the rheumatologist, all these came. And I was like, okay, so this is new. I have to start taking all these medications. And, I had to change up a couple of doctors because some doctors don't actually understand or they don't know how to explain, what you're going through. And I'm like, and I'm Southern and I'm Nigerian and my husband's Caribbean. So I'm like, okay, you need to deal with my patients. So,
Yes.
so sometimes that have to come out.
Mhm.
And so, I started diving deep into it and I love it. This is my community. And so I was like, okay, let's go to DC. The first year, which was 2022, I actually wasn't able to walk on Capitol Hill because I got sick. So I had to fly back early. But this year, actually, when I talked to some congressmen, my constituents, came back, my city gave me a proclamation, for all of my lupus work. So, and then, I'm a captain of the lupus walk here in LA. So, and I'm actually on the committee. So, it's like, this is my life. This is my work. I love it. I actually stopped because I worked as a dental hygienist for almost 10 years. So I stopped doing that because I was on the dental board of California. Well, I still am. But I just didn't want to be a liability to my patients. And so I said, in order for me to be a better person, I'm like, I'm going to step away from the career that I've known, all these years. I'm like, and I'm going to throw myself into the lupus work because that feeds my soul, honestly.
No,
So,
that's beautiful. And I mean, I do want to go back to something you said that was important. You said that you didn't want to speak up and your mom told you to speak up and that moved you into this space of like starting to talk more and feeling more comfortable.
yes.
But can you remember like a moment that made you decide to share your story in these bigger ways? Like in like what was it in the talking that made you feel like you had a story that you needed to share?
Because I said I know it's other people coming behind me that feels the same way. So in order for me to help them, then I need to start talking. I need to help myself in order for me to help other people. I can't advocate for other people if I'm not speaking or I'm not talking. So I'm like, I have to throw myself out there in order to help other people that's coming up being diagnosed behind me.
Thank you so much, Monet. A lot of people don't really know what it's like to be an advocate on Capitol Hill. So can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Oh, that was beautiful. God, that was beautiful. So being an advocate on Capitol Hill, we walked in the Capitol, we talked to our congressman about funding more medications. Oh, I'm in that picture. Yeah, funding more medications, speaking more about clinical trials, because there's only 3 medications that are funded by the FDA for lupus patients. We have to borrow medications from other patients, like cancer patients. So that was the reason why I wanted to go speak to our congressmen and our constituents on Capitol Hill. So how can you help us? How can you help fund more medication for us and do more clinical trials? Because it's only 14% of African American people that are in clinical trials. So that was what I wanted to talk to them about and be able to like voice my opinion like on that.
Thank you for sharing. I know that you've
Yeah.
actually received awards for your work. So tell us more about that and what that means to you.
Oh God, you'll make me cry, woman.
Bring it.
uh, I've gotten two proclamations from my city. I live in the city of Alhambra in California. And so for the past 2 years, they've recognized my work in lupus. And so they gave me two proclamations and a ceremony. So that means so much because I've only been diagnosed for 3 years. So for the past 2 years of them recognizing my work means everything to me.
No, that's beautiful, and you're doing great work. I
Thank
think
you.
that I see a lot of people living with lupus that come up to me and ask me, how can I get more involved, and how can I figure this out? What advice do you have? And I'll probably, and I'm going to poke Tamika as well to answer this as well, and maybe Dr. Ty, if you can think of ways that patients can be more active and be able to be advocates on this other national or even local level. What advice do you have for them?
I didn't know anything about lupus before I was diagnosed. So the first thing I did was go on lupus.org and they provide you with all the information you need. Just type in the state that you live in and they'll provide you with information on your local walk managers, your regionals, the support groups. They locate you to everybody. So I would just go into that and then just do my research from lupus.org and it'll provide all the information that you need. Because before that, I mean, I didn't think 3 years ago I would I facilitate two groups in California now. So I wouldn't think that I would be doing that, but lupus.org really, it helps like a lot to really connect you to the right people in your area.
Definitely the foundations. Where's your pom poms? I had them nearby. We are going to bring them out. I was looking for them. I just came off of the Lupus Walk this weekend. Same here in New York. I was out there, and it was so energizing to see all of the people that were advocating in such a big way to support.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and definitely
all that purple spirit. Yes.
I want to go back because in the beginning you said, I just didn't want to speak up in the support group. And I think that it's a big jump going from being diagnosed to sitting down, whether it's virtual or in person, in a support group setting. I don't know if you have any words for people kind of thinking about taking that jump or toying with the idea of joining one.
Yeah, just keep going to the support groups. Keep going to the support group. It's very inspiring. And eventually you will start talking, because we do call on people like sometimes like, hey, how are you? And, sometimes when it's somebody that's like I was that didn't want to talk, I will send them a direct message and say, hey, how are you today? Are you all right? You good? Take your time, speak up when you need to, and then eventually they would want to start talking. So, I think that's beautiful in terms of, you know, keep continuing to go to the support groups because that's what happened to me. They reached out to me and I was like, but, my mom knew I was always kind of like, I was out there and I was, very active and, I wanted to be around people and, I wanted to make everybody happy. So, when I was diagnosed with lupus and then I kind of shut down. And so that was rare, for everybody to see. So, eventually, I kept going to the support groups, kept talking, a little bit, and then I just became myself again. I mean, yes, I still mourn my old self because, my old self didn't have to take all these medications and feel fatigue and the swelling and the pain and going to all these doctors all the time. But I know if not me, then who?
Right. If I could just also, I love that you're bringing up the support groups. If I could bring up another piece of that, which is the role of stress and emotions in some of these conditions, right? And so I know when sometimes when I recommend support groups to patients, it's like I'm dealing with, I'm managing fine. I have my family, I have my church, and it's like
Yes.
Yeah.
I wish I could do more to explain to folks the role of mental health on our physical health as well. So yes,
Yes.
it is so that you can hear what other people are going through, maybe learn some tips and tricks, but it's
Yes.
also the fact that there's still something about getting that out, like you said, finally speaking up about it, that I believe, right? And I'm sure a lot of us do believe also has a role on how stress then sits in our body, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So as you're dealing with flares, yes, there's medications, yes, there's other treatments. However, there's still a role for all the other lifestyle stuff, which is how are you eating? Are you sleeping well? Are you stressed? And are those things making your flares worse? And I
Yeah.
think sometimes we don't always see those support groups as a part of the treatment. We see it as like, oh, well, you're new and you need to learn. But no, sometimes going, or even if you don't speak up and you're just listening and somehow you get something out of that, or maybe you just don't feel alone anymore.
Yeah.
We take for granted what that is now doing to our stress level, our cortisol level, our sadness, and how that then can also affect flares. Right. So I just wanted to throw the science side of that too. Yes, it's about feel good, but it's also can have a big effect on how your disease process is even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm like,
Definitely.
and
I know.
I'm not all happy go lucky every day.
Oh
So,
no, we know, and I think that that's the thing that's really beautiful about being able to have this conversation. I do want to bring Tamika in because we're going to wrap this segment up. But just Tamika, I'm just curious. Like you went on a big platform. What did it take for you to find, that strength in yourself to be able to speak about living with lupus and also speaking about endometriosis, which is something you're very outspoken about.
A lot of times, people in our community they don't have anyone to turn to. I know in my area, for example, there are no support groups. There are no support groups. My mother was diagnosed with lupus, but at that time, the healthcare system was a lot different than what the treatment and the process that I went through. So I had to learn how to navigate that system, like literally navigate that system with knowing very little about lupus. Because if you don't know what lupus is, if you've never experienced it, you don't know it. Okay. And so I felt like I wanted to be that person that speaks out and let people know what I was going through and like, hey, I'm just like everyone else, and that the road is not easy. And I have my good days, I have my bad days, but this is a part of me. This is something that's my new life now. This is my new way of life. So I just moved on from that point perspective of it. And even on my platforms, I use platforms a lot in the process. I use my platforms a lot to speak about like this is health, mental illness awareness week. And so I'm speaking about the mental side of what we go through with chronic illness and chronic pain. I'm speaking about complementary and alternative medicine as well, so that I can give others options, things that I've utilized during my process to help me to manage at home so that I won't be a frequent flyer, because sometimes we have to think about things like stressors, environmental factors, living close to the plant life, and all of those different things can play a part in what we go through in our bodies. So I just took that stance.
Thank you.
ma'am.
Thank you. Period.
This is such amazing advice. Thank you so much, all three of you, Tamika, Monet, Dr. Ty. I think your sharing has really given our viewers some perspective on ways we can truly have a hand in our own outcomes as patients and have a positive impact. And I think that's really true advocacy. So speaking of self-advocacy, we're going to introduce a new segment on Better Together, and it's called Spotlight on Research.
Yes, because and I think Monet mentioned it earlier, so it's a really good segue to talk about it. This is another way to take control of your health, and that's through supporting the research that leads to new therapies. And this segment that we're going to be doing moving forward is allowing guests from different research sites around the country to better explain the journey that leads to new treatments, so we can fully understand the clinical trial process, the facts, the myths, the misunderstandings, and how we can and why we should consider and think about like why this would be able to help us and be a form of advocacy. So I'm I mean, I think we could bring our guests. I mean, Monet talked a little bit about it, and I feel like it would be really good to have her just saying this. Dr. Bayer, Dr. Gaines, Monet, Tamika, if this is something that interests you, is the clinical trial process a form of self-advocacy? I'm curious to hear your thoughts around that. Can it be?
Go ahead, Dr. Ty.
No, I've never heard it put like that, but I do think that it can be. I think Monet did touch on this as well. It can be difficult, and I'm sure, Dr. Michaela knows as well, if there are some things that are different according to different groups of folks. And if I by all means understand the hesitancy, right? We brought up several times just in this chat about medical gaslighting and biases and things of that nature. But the other side of that is that if we don't participate, we don't know how these things will affect us and if they will affect us differently. There's one example that, because there's a lot more studies about it, is with breast cancer, right? There's been research where they showed the same exact treatment, different ethnicities, it worked differently. Even when you balance it out for income, job, things like that, it still worked physically, it worked different. And so if we are not a part of those studies, how will we ever know that? So I think it's important. I do think it's a form of self-advocacy. And I also think it's part of a solution. Because again, if we can't figure out how to treat folks that look like us, if we never enter the trials, if we don't, then how do we help the rest of the folks that look like us that are coming behind us?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that we know that everyone might not know is that, unfortunately, we don't really have all the time really equal representation in clinical trials. So, thinking about being in a clinical trial is advocating for people who, may look like you in your family, in your community, because it makes sure we really understand how different treatments work in all different people.
Yeah. And Monet, you mentioned clinical trials as part of the advocacy you did on Capitol Hill. And so I'm just curious in your thoughts on this as another, being able to be a part of something like that. Is that something that you're interested in learning more about or interested in or anything like that? I'm just curious.
I'm interested in learning more about it. I'm actually a part of LRAN, which is called Lupus Research Action Network. Oh, you are too. Yeah. Which is a part of LFA. So I'm still learning more information about it, I guess, because I've had a cancerous tumor that I had to have 3 surgeries on. I'm kind of hesitant about it, but I know it's important because, like Dr. Tamika said, if I had to look, I'm so blind. Oh my God. Oh my God. Dr. Ty, Lord have mercy.
I'm like, Tamika, you a doctor girl.
I'm like, I need to put on my glasses. But yeah, like Dr. Ty said, if the research is not, if we don't have a lot of representation in clinical trials, then how are we going to help each other? So I'm still, looking into the information about it, because, like I said earlier, it's only 14% of Black women that are in clinical trials. So we do need more, especially when we only have 3 medications funded by the FDA. So we do need more because 3 medications, we need more than that.
Especially for a disease that has so many different manifestations of it, to have just only 3. And I'll hesitate to say funded by the FDA, but more approved by the FDA.
Approved by the FDA.
Just to clarify for our viewers.
Yeah, so we do need more.
But it's right.
Yeah,
You're absolutely correct.
Approved by the FDA. So we do need more because lupus is a domino effect. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We all have more than one autoimmune disease. So we do need more research in terms of clinical trials.
Definitely. And as someone who's participated in clinical trials, and my participation, I like to think of it as my participation led to the treatment that exists now. Because I came up in a world, I was diagnosed in 2004. There was no medication for lupus.
Oh, Lord.
All. So it's a new world. I know both of y'all are like, what? I'm telling you, it was like, so what's the lupus treatment? And they're like,
oh my goodness.
it is,
Wow.
me being a part of the clinical trial felt like self-advocacy. It also felt like I was advocating for other people too. So that's, I guess, yeah, I was, yay. But and it's crazy because I'm taking the treatment that I advocated for, and so I'm really excited. Thank you so much for just, I know this was not definitely on the docket for you all to have this conversation. But thank you for this bringing some thoughts into this new segment that we're going to be launching that I'm so excited about. And each week we do this, we'll be taking a deep dive. Monet, make sure you check back in so you can learn some more. We got you.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about the clinical trial process.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much to our guests. I just want to say thank you for using your voices and making such an impact on Dr. Ty, yourself and your patients, Tamika, people everywhere living with chronic illnesses, just in general, speaking about endometriosis and lupus. And Monet, thank you for your work in support groups and in conjunction with foundations. Y'all kicked this season off right.
Thank you. It's like I'm looking at my glasses right now. Like, where are you?
Thank you
so much for kicking off the season with us. We also want to thank all of our viewers for joining us. Thank you to Biogen for allowing us to be here tonight. If anyone is interested in getting more information about lupus or information about participating in clinical trials, please go to www.biogentriallink.com. biogentriallink.com, guys. And if you're interested in a specific lupus clinical study, take a second to scan any one of these QR codes you can see on the screen, and you can learn more. So if you didn't get a chance to scan the codes, don't worry. We're going to share them again at the end of the show. We want you to join us the week after next, so not next Tuesday, the following Tuesday, October 22nd, for a new episode of Better Together, sharing our lupus stories. Our topic is going to be what's going on your body with lupus, where we'll be learning what actually goes on inside your body, the cell level, when we talk about lupus. So join our community. What'd you say?
I was going to say it's really important because I think, a lot of times we think about lupus and we know how we feel, but we don't always know what's going on inside. So I'm really excited for that show.
Definitely. So join us, follow us on Instagram. You can check us out at 4 Better Together Lupus, and on Facebook. We're just really so excited. And finally, we're going to close our show with our lovely host, Chanel's spoken word.
So as we talk about this idea of advocacy, I wrote this poem thinking about voice and how important it is to use our voices, because we definitely don't always recognize how powerful it is. So here is a little poem. There is a power in voice, vocalizing need, vocalizing hurt, demanding others know your worth. Because no one can silence me unless I give them permission. My voice demands you recognize my value. And I'm no mathematician, but I'm not afraid to champion unity in a world that prefers division. Looking for more to join me, because that's how I do addition. Getting rid of the self-doubt like subtraction. Teaching my fellow Lupies to speak up so our voices do multiplication. And ring so loud that the healthcare landscape is a design of our creation. We will speak regardless. We will speak regardless of how high the tide, how stormy the weather, when each of us bring our hands and hearts and connect them for this endeavor. We are using our voices to uplift each other, knowing we deserve the best and we become even better together. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And once again, just please, I'm just reiterating, if you didn't get a chance to see the codes, please learn a little bit more about the different clinical studies that are offered, and knowing that the studies are not all medication-based. Some of them are just trying to learn more about lupus. Take a second to scan any one of the QR codes that you see on the screen to learn more. And once again, please join us the week after next on Tuesday, October 22nd, for our next episode of Better Together, sharing our lupus stories. And follow us on